It's the second episode of the week for the Fenway Rundown. I'm Sean McAdam. Chris Cotillo is off on some well-deserved vacation. He'll be gone for about a week and a half. So you're stuck with me for a while, but I have a terrific guest this afternoon. It's Eric Sherman, who has co-authored a book with former Red Sox great Dwight Evans called Dewey, Behind the Gold Glove. We'll be talking to Eric in just a minute. But a reminder about the Red Sox Insider Text program at MassLive.com, which you can join by texting the word join to 617-751-6257 and click the link to subscribe. That will give you a free introductory 14-day trial period. After that, there's a $4.99 per month charge. It's an opportunity to keep up on all the Red Sox news breaking during the day, lineups, changes, roster moves, ask us questions, provide questions for future mailbag episodes of this podcast, on and on. We think you'll enjoy it. And now, our guest, Erik Sherman. As mentioned, we're pleased to have with us as a guest for this episode of the Fenway Rundown, author Erik Sherman, who has written a number of baseball books, everything from a look back at '86, some Red Sox material, some other non-Red Sox baseball books, and of course the one that we're interested in, the newest one, is Dewey, Beyond the Gold Glove, a project undertaken and written with former Red Sox player Dwight Evans. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Good to be here.
Great. First of all, start off, what made this a compelling book and project for you to undertake? Why a biography and a partnership with Dwight Evans?
Well, it fits in well with my previous 8 book projects, which all transcend baseball. They're all human interest stories. These ball players, they deal with immense challenges that they try to overcome, and Dwight's story certainly qualifies. I mean, everybody knows that he had a great 20-year career, 8 Gold Gloves, more home runs than any American leaguer in the decade of the '80s, more extra base hits in all of baseball during the decade of the '80s. That's well known. But what the average baseball fan doesn't realize is that he accomplished all that he did while helping raise 2 boys with just a terrible disease, neurofibromatosis, commonly referred to as NF, a disease that both sons eventually succumbed to as young adults. So they both had over 40 surgeries each. So Dwight played almost his entire baseball career while coming out of surgeries and hospitals, and so it was a real strain for him, obviously, and his family. So to accomplish all that he did, one of the greatest Red Sox of all time, under normal circumstances would be daunting, but when you throw in everything that happened with his boys, it just takes it up another step.
Yeah, it certainly does. It's a remarkable bit of mental strength and discipline. I think we know, having been around the game, how difficult it is. Baseball, it's commonly said, is a game of failure, where 3 times out of 10 is considered a success. And to have the demands of being a professional athlete and the pressures that come with that, and on top of that, the enormous burden of dealing with 2 very sick children and then young adults, as you noted. Throughout the book, there's instance after instance of teammates, people with whom Dwight was close with, saying they never knew what he was going through on a daily basis. The fact that he would leave Fenway and go to the hospital and sometimes stay there. He would come from the hospital to the ballpark. And of course, his wife Susan had to deal with much of this on her own while Evans is playing road games and on road trips. It really is eye-opening to think of somebody not only tackling the demands of being a professional athlete, but then to have this even tougher thing to be placed upon you in your personal life with your family.
Yeah, no question about it. And he really was able to rise to the occasion. We talk about the spiritual home runs in the book, and I'll give you one instance, one great story. I remember the date because I happened to be in Fenway Park that night when it happened. It was a bus trip from the Ted Williams baseball camp when I was 16, August 30th, 1982. And I didn't realize, of course, but before the game, Dwight had just left one of his sons after a 12-hour surgery. And and as Dwight's getting ready to leave for the ballpark, Timothy, his oldest son, said, "Hey, Dad, would you do me a favor? Would you hit me a home run tonight?" And Dwight's like, "Oh, Tim, I'll do the best I can, but that's really a hard thing to promise." So he's getting ready to leave. He's late for batting practice, and Timothy goes, "Dad, would you do me another favor?" What? Would you hit me two home runs tonight? And Dwight's like, "Look, I've got to go, but I'll do the best that I can." Well, that night, sure enough, Dwight hit two home runs and he threw in a triple for good measure. And he did things like that throughout his career. He was very involved with the Jimmy Fund and visiting children in hospitals. And it wasn't the only time that some kid that was sick or even dying in some cases, and they would ask him to hit a home run, and he would do it. So that narrative is intertwined throughout the story as well. And so I mean, yeah, you can't make this stuff up. It's just a remarkable part of who he was. Sleepless nights, the concentration, never making excuses for those sleepless nights, and those days that he would slump through a game, and maybe the fans would get on him a little bit, unbeknownst to them, what was going on behind the scenes.
So you talked about what attracted you to this project. Why was the timing right for Dwight to do this book now in retirement?
I think it was just ready. Dwight's a man of faith, and um, he had a Pastor Betzer, in Florida, who had written something like 25 books. And he said to Dwight years ago, you really should write a book. I mean, you've had a compelling career in life, and Dwight really put it off, I think, because he was caring for his two sons up until just a few years ago. And then his wife got very sick, Susan. And so he's been caring for his family for a lot of years, even since his playing days ended. And I think the timing was just right. I wrote a book entitled Two Sides of Glory, the 1986 Boston Red Sox in their own words, a few years ago. And I wrote literary portraits of the key and most intriguing players from that team. So I gave them all a chapter. And so I gave chapter 10 to Dwight, and I think he was really impressed with it, with how it was written, the sensitivity in which it was written, and he called me after he received a copy of the book, and he said, "You know what? You're the one. Let's do this book together." And so we did, and it took us a while to get started because of his wife's health issues. But once we did, we got rolling on it, and he said to me a couple of weeks ago that he hasn't been this happy in years, that the book has really, it's been therapeutic for him. Getting out there, talking about his career, talking about his life has been very good to him. And he's always been the type of person where he wants to give back to the fans. And this is a vehicle in which he can do it.
We're talking with Eric Sherman, who is the author of uh, Dewey, Behind the Gold Glove. It's available from Triumph Publishing. and available in bookstores everywhere, and of course on Amazon. What was Dwight's relationship with a couple of Red Sox legends who preceded him, one of whom he played with, another whom he didn't, Ted Williams and Carl Yastrzemski?
Hmm. Well, very different relationships with
Right.
those two. So Ted Williams, his first experience meeting Ted, he introduced himself to Ted during a batting practice, and he went over to him and of course, Ted Williams at that point wasn't just a baseball legend, but an American icon. And he asked Ted a question, and Ted just completely blew up at him, loud enough in that voice of Ted's, if you're familiar with it. It was
Hmm.
just a booming voice heard throughout the ballpark. Everyone on the field could hear him reaming out Dewey. Uh, Spectators that were around could hear him. And it was one of the most humiliating experiences Dwight Evans has ever had. And for years, um, he tried to cultivate a relationship with Ted Williams. And he would succeed right at the end of Ted Williams' career by being inducted into Ted Williams' Hitters Hall of Fame, I think a year before Ted passed away. So he certainly earned Ted's respect at a minimum. But there was never a question of the respect that Dwight showed to Ted, not just for what he did in baseball, but also his service to the country. Carl Yastrzemski was completely different. They got along. I mean, Dwight came into the major leagues at 20 years old, the end of the 72 season. And by that point, Carl Yastrzemski had been in the league for about 11 or 12 years. He had won the Triple Crown with the Impossible Dream 67 Red Sox that went to a Game 7 of the World Series. Yastrzemski was a major sports hero in this country by that point, but really took Dwight under his wing as a big brother would. And so they would go fishing together. They'd go out to eat together on the road. Um, Dwight became close with Carl's family. And then later in life, Carl would lose his son through an infection in the hospital. And then, of course, Dwight would lose both of his sons. So they have that in common too. And so Dwight has said that Carl is his greatest friend in baseball. And I think they're kindred spirits as well.
I'm curious what Dwight's relationship was with the Yakis, who owned the franchise for so long. Thomas A. Yaki, who bought the team in the 30s and owned them well into the 70s before passing in 76. And his wife, Jean, and the estate owned the team right up until 2001, 2002, before it was sold to the current ownership group led by John Henry. There wasn't a lot of time, I'm guessing, for Dwight to get to know Tom Yaki, who was only there for the first few years of Dwight's career. Mrs. Yaki there considerably longer. What sort of bond, if any, did he have with either of the two Yakis?
I don't think it was a particularly close bond, but I will say this, and Dwight talks about this in the book. He had a great deal of respect for Tom Yawkey and then Jean Yaki later. Um, they treated the players well. Free agency certainly changed the landscape. And the Red Sox in the late 70s, early 80s would begin to lose some of their stars with the advent of free agency. However, Dwight thinks that Tom Yawkey was more than fair and treated everyone the same. And he points out how Tom Yawkey would come into the clubhouse and spend just as much time as Carl Yastrzemski as he would spend with Reggie Smith or George Scott. That it, of course, Tom Yawkey um, they named the street in front of Fenway Park Yawkey Way for many, many years, and it's now back to being called Jersey again. And I think Dwight really doesn't think that was the right thing to do because of what he observed. He didn't observe any racism from Tom Yawkey. That, again, he spent just as much time with the African American players as he did with the white players. Um, and with Gene, I think Gene got along well with everybody. It's um, it's just unfortunate what happened with free agency. And one thing I'll add is Dwight calls the 1975 World Series the last pure World Series, and what he means by that is that the Reds and Red Sox grew their teams through their farm systems and through astute trades. Free agency, of course, changed everything, and
And free
so
agency arrived right after that World Series. That was when
right.
started to see Catfish Hunter and some of the first big name players, Reggie Jackson, begin to choose teams, and the free agency era ushered in. Was there ever a point as free agency became part of the game and as uh, Dwight's service time increased and he became eligible, was there ever a time where he contemplated leaving the Red Sox in free agency?
Yes. And I'm laughing because somebody asked him that question one time, and he said, "Yeah, it's in the book." Eric brought it up because he really looks at himself. I mean, this is his 50th year with the Red Sox. I mean,
No.
he is Mr. Red Sox, and how in the world number 24 is still in circulation is beyond me. But anyway, that's another argument, I guess, for another day. But yeah, there was a point where where the Red Sox had ownership issues in the early 80s, where there was like, there was a coup going on,
Right. The
and
Buddy LaRue Haywood Sullivan split.
right, exactly. And yeah, the Red Sox would play a West Coast game, and they would board a plane at, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to head back east instead of, and it was on an off day. So like instead of having a chartered plane at a decent time, they were running these guys ragged to save a few bucks. And so he didn't like that. And he was kind of the clubhouse lawyer, not by choice, but the players would come to him at that point in his career and would complain. And so he was the one that would go back to management and say, we, you really need to treat us a little bit better than you are. And so there was a point for a few months where he was open to a trade. Let's just say that.
He's one of the rare players in modern baseball history, maybe all of baseball history, who performed better as he got older. Usually,
Mhm.
players are at their athletic and physical peak from maybe mid 20s into,
Mhm.
30, 31, 32, and then there's a decline. Evans's career in the 70s, where he struggled to sort of become more than a platoon player or known mostly for his glove. He wasn't as consistent offensively. And then around 1980 or 81, a switch flips. When he looks back at that sort of disparity, why he was a better player from 29 on than he had been from 20 to 27 or 28, how does he explain that?
Well, he gives a lot of credit to Walt Riniak,
Hmm.
who helped a lot of those guys. He had a major influence on Wade Boggs and Marty Barrett, Bill Buckner. Um, I mean, just a tremendous influence, and it's a shame. Ted Williams was just brutal on Walt Riniak and his approach to hitting, which differed from Ted. And but yeah, Dwight was really struggling after, especially after a couple of concussions late in the 70s, and he was trying to um, get back on mark. I mean, he was a good hitter in the 70s, but he was known for his defense, for his rifle arm. Um, but working with Riniak really changed everything and really made him into one of the game's elite hitters beginning around 1981, a season where he really should have been the MVP winner in the American League. I think they gave it to Raleigh Fingers, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Ricky Henderson may have finished second and Dwight third, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, Dwight had a great 1981 season, and then for the rest of the decade, like I said, was a dominant hitter. So he worked diligently at his hitting and really listened to what Riniak was preaching, and turned himself into a terrific hitter, an elite hitter to go with that great defense.
In the 21st century, the Red Sox have enjoyed terrific team success. They are the only franchise to have won 4 titles in 2004, 2007, 2013, and 2018. But of course, that was not always the case. They were known for their excruciating postseason losses at times, and Dwight was part of 3 of those. Technically, 78 was not a postseason, but rather extension of the regular season, the playoff game. But you think about the 75 World Series in which he shone, but the team lost in 7 games to Cincinnati. The 78 race with the Yankees, the playoff game that goes the wrong way for the Red Sox. And then, of course, 86 with the Mets, which you've documented. How does he look back on those 3 close calls with the championship that eluded him ultimately?
Yeah, so very differently is the short answer. In 75, he recognized what he was a part of. The 75 World Series, he talks about game 6, where he made what Sparky Anderson, the Hall of Fame manager of the Reds, called the greatest catch he ever saw. What Dwight himself calls the most important catch he's ever seen. Um, and in the middle of that iconic game 6, Pete Rose turns to him, just as apparently Pete also turned to Carlton Fisk in that game and said, "Isn't this the greatest game you've ever played in?" And so he looked at 75 as the beginning of something. You know, they had rookies like Fred Lynn and Jim Rice and a young Rick Burleson and really a young team with some terrific veterans like Yastrzemski and Fisk, although Fisk was still young then. And so he saw that as the beginning of something. By 78, losing that one game playoff, it kind of felt like it could be the end of an opportunity, like a window was closing. Um, by 86, um, it was heartbreaking because, they were one strike away from ending a 68-year drought. And, before the floodgates opened up at the end of game 6 against the Mets. Um, but he looks at that series differently today than he did after that 86 series. After the 86 series, he thought, well, that was a terrible World Series. But over the years, after talking to countless fans about it, fans of the game, he's come to realize how important that series was to baseball. It was the most game 6 and 7 of that series were the most watched World Series games to that point, might even still be today. And so he understood what that series meant to baseball and the importance of it, even though it was heartbreaking.
You mentioned the 24 and the uniform number and the sanctity of that. He has not had his number retired as other Red Sox greats have, nor has he gained entrance into Cooperstown, although there was the thought a few years ago during one of the era committees balloting that he might get in. He
Mm.
missed out. He could come up again soon. How does he look at that, being shut out to date? How important do you think it is to him to get in, and where does he stand on that issue?
He doesn't really think about it much, but obviously, it would mean a great deal to him. I think that he looks at his career and what analytics people have come back to him with. Tyler Kepner in the New York of the New York Times wrote a piece a few weeks ago, and he noted how there are only 54 players in the history of baseball with an OPS and WAR combined that are equal to or better than Dwight Evans. Four of them were connected with steroids, and the other 50 are all in the Hall of Fame. Um, and we're not even including really his defense a whole lot into that equation. So he's, he scratches his head wondering, well,
What do I have to do?
what do I have to do? Yeah. And exactly. And so he knows it's out of his control. I think he understands when he came up for the Hall of Fame on the writer's ballot, we were right in the heart of the steroid era, where all of a sudden, his, I think it was 385 career home runs. Um, you know, let's call it 400. Now the new 400 was like 550 or 500. And 30 home runs in a season. Well, now it was 45. The steroids just skewed the record books, and he was just coming onto the ballot at that point. And I think if he was coming onto the writers' ballot today, they would look at things like WAR and OPS, which they really didn't look at back in those days at all. So he would be looked at very, very differently today. And so my understanding is that he should be on the ballot with what they used to call the Veterans Committee, not this coming winter, but the winter after. And the last time he was on it, he had 8 votes out of 16, and you only need 12 to get induction. So um, I think he's got a good chance. And hopefully this book will help put a spotlight on him and make people understand how good he was and how good he was while dealing with what he was dealing with off the field.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about analytics and looking at someone's career a little differently in hindsight. Certainly, the on base ability, which is now prized and perhaps wasn't given the proper attention. The defensive prowess, if you looked at defensive runs saved, to say nothing of the assists that he had with his arm strength, all those things you would think help his case. We'll see in about a year and a half, and cross our fingers and see what happens for Dwight Evans. The book is Dewey, Behind the Gold Glove. Eric Sherman, the author or co-author with Dwight Evans, has been our guest. It's available from Triumph Publishing. Eric, I know that you did a joint book signing with Dwight recently, I think in Dwight's adopted hometown of Linfield just this past weekend. Are there
Yeah.
any others coming up or any other ways where people could either meet Dwight or meet you or have a copy signed?
Yeah. So our next book event will be with Sabre New England in Springfield, Massachusetts, Saturday, September 14th at 10 a.m. Again, at Springfield College. And if you can't make it and you'd like a signed copy, you can reach out to me through my website, which is ericshermanbaseball.com. And for future signings, my
And
Twitter
we should
is,
point out that's Eric with a K, ericshermanbaseball.com.
yep. And my Twitter, which will let you know about where all of our appearances are in the future, it's at by at by Eric Sherman. Yeah, so those are the best ways to get a book or come out and see Dwight and I.
Great. Well, it is a terrific read. Uh, Dewey, Behind the Gold Glove by Eric Sherman and Dwight Evans. If you're a Red Sox fan of any vintage, I think you'll find it highly entertaining and enjoyable. Recommend it highly. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Our thanks to Eric Sherman, co-author of the book Dewey, Behind the Gold Glove, available now from Triumph Publishing. As Eric noted, there are a number of signings and possibilities to meet both the author and the co-author, Dwight Evans. So follow Eric on his Twitter account by Eric Sherman. That's Eric with a K, and you'll stay up to date on where you can see him. And you can stay up to date on all Red Sox news, roster moves, lineups, changes, and get all the latest developments that you want as a Red Sox fan by texting the word join to 617-751-6257. Then simply click the link that will give you a free 14-day trial period. After that, it's $4.99 monthly.